Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you?
Good morning, Frank, and how are you?
Very
I
well,
hope you
thank you.
enjoyed your Thanksgiving holiday, which I've just learned by reading the proclamation of George Washington in when he was president, that it actually is a religious holiday, which I hadn't realized that. We're giving thanks to God. I had not understood that at all before. However, that's not what I want to talk about today. What's been annoying me more and more is the use of the term populism and trying to work out why it's being used and what the problems are going to be with the fact that the use of it seems to me to be turning everything on its head. Because populism, as I understand it, and it took me some time to work out exactly what people meant by it, means catering to the people,
Hmm.
i.e., the ordinary people. And I think that what's been going on in the world for some time now, to an increasing extent, is that the ordinary people, meaning people who are much more aware of the world as a whole as a result of globalization, but in fact are no less that they know less and are less well educated, less well informed, despite the increasing amounts of information available, about what is really going on.
Hmm.
So that what is happening is that democracy is being turned on its head. We used to think that democracy was the way to run everything, and America has been thought to be the most ideally democratic country, and America has been trying to export its democracy over the rest of the world. But democracy, even though it has worked very differently from the time it began, and it keeps changing in the way it works ever since then, and worked very well for a short period to my mind, in the 20th century, when it finally did get to the point where everybody had a vote and everybody had the same rights to contribute to political decision making.
Hmm.
But then, since the middle of the last century, what has happened is that the way the larger number of people who are not so well informed but have equal rights are making up their minds about what to vote for, are they're controlling the results of the democracy. And so that's why we have um, uh, um, disappointing results to elections in more and more different countries. And it's certainly happened in this country since 2016. And there's a danger of it happening in England, and there was a sign of it possibly beginning to happen in France. And we're wondering now what's going to happen in Germany. Putin gets a lot of support of that type, and so on. So that's one thing that I think is going to put us in a situation in the not too distant future of trying to work out what the best sort of political system could be that would give equal rights to everybody, but would also make sure that we have in government people who know what they're doing.
Well, it's an interesting observation you make, and I'm thinking back as you were talking, something jingled in my memory. I was thinking back to college classes at Georgetown University. I took in American history long, long ago in the 70s, and reading through the texts and listening in the classroom discussion and the lectures, there was a hint of disapproval throughout those courses about the rise of populism in American history. For example, with the election of Andrew Jackson in the 1820s and other times in the 19th century. And the disapproval stemmed not so much from the extension of democracy to all the people, but more as to the way the reins of power seem to have been grasped very firmly by people who knew not what they were doing. And I think that's really become a big part of the challenge today. And the idea of stepping back and removing the franchise to vote from anybody, I think, is anathema. So you're left with the other alternative, which is to, I suppose, bring the level of understanding and education and knowledge up to the same standing as everybody has to all of those people who are voting and are participating now. And that's really, in a nutshell, what we've been discussing in globalization for years and years now. And I don't know how feasible that ever is going to be.
It's certainly going to be very difficult, and one wonders whether the growing reaction to the current administration in this country will lead to some sort of rethinking. Because every day one reads in the newspapers what's going on in Washington, what the Democrats are hoping to do in the next couple of years. Whether they'll be able to do anything or not, I don't know, but it looks as though there may be quite a struggle in the next couple of years between the Democrats and the Republican supported administration, and that may lead to rethinking. I don't know.
I think that's the biggest understatement I've heard this month as to what's going to start happening down there in January. And you're right. And then the question is, if the vote is that important, perhaps there should be some requirement before people are given the approval for the right to vote, that they have to take even some sort of basic civics class online and answer a multiple choice test. I don't know what the answer is. But
well, the main difference between the European democratic systems and the American is that in America, because of the way the Constitution is written, it's possible for somebody with no experience in government to find themselves in charge of government, able to do things without getting approval from anybody else. Whereas in the European systems, you can only get to the point where you're in charge of the government if you come slowly up through the ranks.
Good point.
In governmental structure. And also, once you're at the top, you can't do things on your own without the approval of other people around you. Now, that may require some rewriting of the Constitution, which would be, of course, very difficult. But it could be done in the same. There's a lot of things that go on in Washington that are part of the way the government runs, which are not in the Constitution, if I understand correctly. Right. And so it could be done without any constitutional change. Anyway, that's one thing that strikes me as related to this increasing use of the term populism, but the opposite of what the use of the term populism seems to mean. And another one is the fact that is not happening so much here, although it is happening here. It's happening more in Europe. And this has nothing to do with constitutions. It's people are paying less and less attention to what they're told by medical practitioners. And deciding that vaccinations are not good for you. And so the number of people getting measles every spring has been increasing every year recently, simply because people are not getting vaccinations because they think there's something bad about them. And this is, again, I think, that where 50 years ago, when I was growing up, well, more than 50 years ago, but up to about 50 years ago, people who were in what in England we call the lower classes learned what to do from the upper classes. And
Yes.
now the lower classes think they're in charge, but they don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. The vaccination conundrum is especially interesting to me because what seems to have happened is precisely because of some of the effects of globalization and the spread of information, you have people with no medical training or background making decisions, medical decisions, that affect their children based on the information they're downloading and searching for on the internet. And it's a crime, and it really, it's in a small way. It's a microcosm of what's going on everywhere. This is how people are living their lives. They feel empowered by these tools, and they feel that no one other than them can make the best decisions for themselves. And in some small way, or perhaps, or maybe a medium way, or even a big way, they might be right. I understand that. This has really empowered them and given them the freedom that we've all wanted since the beginning of time. But in another way, we're all living together as part of one big society, and we have basic responsibilities toward each other. And people overlook that.
And now it's becoming a single global society of 10 billion where things can happen much more quickly than they happened before, and therefore things are much more dangerous. I think that the problem with this really is that the best way to say this, I'm not sure, it's what we've come around to saying in a number of different contexts over the last few years, is that all the different forms of organization, whether formal or informal, that we were used to at earlier stages of history and before we became aware of globalization, are not working anymore, and we are incapable of so far of organizing anything beyond the level of the nation state. And even what we organize within the nation state is not working as well as it used to, and we haven't understood yet how to revise it so that it would work better. So organization, I think, continues to be our most significant challenge.
I agree with that, but as you've often said, it has to come from the bottom up. It can't come from the top down. And that means that there first has to be realization that what currently exists is not working. And I think what's going on is that we have to wait for this era to pass where the delight that the people from the bottom up have been experiencing and having made the changes in society and in government and in institutions by virtue of their will and vote, until that passes and they begin to understand the cold reality that, well, wait a minute, maybe this wasn't a good idea to put someone in charge who has zero experience whatsoever. Or maybe it wasn't a good idea to secede from a common block of trading partners and political partners, etc. And only then, I think, are we going to have people come to the table and say, well, okay, wait a minute, we really do have to figure something out to make this work better. Because right now, I mean, that's not even in the cards. That's not going to happen. You couldn't go to those people who have been empowered now by populism and say, okay, look, just because you won, now we have to change everything. It's not going to work like that. They have to come back to the table and say, this is not working.
Yes. I suppose we have to wait and see what happens in the next,
10 years.
Well, December is going to be a month of suspense. January is going to start to be very interesting. But in the longer term, yes, it's going to be 10 years.
I know. Well, who knows? Maybe we'll still be doing this then. All right. All right,
Okay.
Professor Spooner, thank you very much. We'll look forward to talking next week. Bye.